Okay, so now that we have Python installed and we've installed Jupyter as an extension of Python, what we're going to do is look at some basic data types in Python. As well as that, I'm going to try and help you with some kind of shortcuts that I use in Jupyter Notebooks a lot. Hopefully it helps, but don't feel too pressured to learn them. We can take things slow, but I just want to show you a basic kind of navigation. So let's open Jupyter Notebooks as we did before. Just open up your command prompt. Here I've just navigated to a directory that makes my life a bit easier. It's just where I store all of my files. I'm just going to open, what we do is inside our command prompt, we just type in Jupyter Notebook and we hit enter. It's going to do all of this fancy stuff. And I'm just going to pull the window out here. You'll notice that my kind of screen is, my theme is dark. Yours might be bright white. I usually just go into settings, theme, and you can change it. Not a big deal. It's completely aesthetic and completely up to you. I just prefer it like this. So when you have your Jupyter open, I have a folder already made. I'm just going to open this up. I'm going to open this folder up. You probably will not have a notebook. I'm just using the notebook as a kind of guide and template for the lesson. But what you could do is just right click when you're in a folder that you want to be in and you feel kind of comfortable. I'd encourage you to kind of section them out. Just click new notebook and then you should have your new notebook open up. Just be sure to hit Control S once you're done to save it. So I'd really encourage you to kind of follow along. I'm just using a kind of template notebook here. I'll put these notebooks up on Git, but I appreciate that not everyone knows what that is. Just while we're here, I'm going to add one more kind of shortcut as well. Let's just do this. D times 2, and this is to delete a cell. Okay, so before I get into kind of the Python stuff, let's take a look at some of these Jupyter Notebooks shortcuts. So what I mean by a cell is one of these kind of blocks. For you, I'm just going to open a new notebook. When you open a new notebook, you'll have something like this. You'll have to select the kernel. You'll have one of these kind of blank boxes, which we call a cell. You can either put in code into one of these cells. So if I do print hello world as our kind of standard, I spelled hello wrong. Or you could also do this thing called markdown, which is a type of text formatting. So let's say you want to put a kind of annotation or a title. What you would do is you would, in a cell, press escape, and then you'd see the cell border kind of highlighted. You'd press M, which takes you to markdown, which you can see here, and now you can start writing text. So if I put one hashtag, that's a kind of heading 1. If I do 2, that's a heading 2. 3 is a heading 3. And I can just even write this is a annotation. And now if I press Shift and Enter, it'll kind of print this in text. So this is not code. This is just for your sake to structure your notebook. So I've done this here to kind of tidy this up, but these are some of the shortcuts that I use. As we just said, if I write code and I want to run it, I usually use Shift and Enter. This runs the cell and then moves on to the next cell. If there is no new other cell, it'll create a new cell as it's doing here. Another one that we use, or I use a lot, is just Alt and Enter. If you want to run only, whoops, sorry, that's a lie, not Alt and Enter, sorry, that's another one. Alt and Enter will essentially run the cell that you have highlighted and then also create a new cell as it's doing here. I don't really use this that often, but the other one that I use a lot is Control and Enter, which is very simple. It just runs whatever cell that you have highlighted. So I just, let's just say I have the cell, I type in here 1 plus 1, and I do Control Enter. It prints the output, doesn't move me around anywhere. The other thing I'll mention about navigation, you'll see that I'm kind of moving around these cells and this blue kind of box is moving. When you're writing code, you'll see the cursor blink. When you press up and down here, it will navigate you through cells, but it's a bit more kind of, you're going through every single line. What I would recommend is you can press escape, and then this takes you into this kind of highlighted border navigation mode. You can press here the arrow keys. So if I press arrow down, it'll take me down. If I press arrow up, it'll take me up a cell. What you can also do is if you have a cell highlighted, if I press A, it'll make a new cell above. If I press B, it'll make a new cell below. And then if I press D twice, it'll actually delete some of these cells. So I don't want to get too technical here with all of these kind of shortcuts. It just makes life easier, but I'm sure you'll figure them out as you go. This is just a kind of basic introduction to them, and I think the more kind of important stuff is what we do next with Python. So I mentioned the next thing that we would talk about is the data types and variables. I wanted to just mention that there's a really good source. There's a person called Brocode on YouTube that makes these really good programming language tutorials. The one that he has for Python is also very good. It's a 12-hour video, so I understand everyone is not going to watch that. I would encourage you to try and watch just the first hour after this. It'll give you a really good introduction to Python and explain some of these concepts a lot better than I can. So I want you to think of a variable as a bucket. And a bucket essentially just stores something, right? It stores a type of data in this case. So it could store a number, it could store a string, that string could be someone's name, or it could be someone's address. But the important thing is that we can declare these variables in Python. So let's give a variable first name. In fact, what I'll do is I'll put this inside of our lovely little string column here. So I'm going to do first underscore name. That's the name of our variable. I'm going to say this is equal to, I'm going to put in quotations, my name. So this is a string because it's a sequence of characters, and strings are usually wrapped in these kind of single quotations, or you can do double quotations. Doesn't really matter, just try and be consistent. And now what we can do is if I write print first name, it's going to say my first name that I've just input. I can change this to something like that as well. What we can also do is now do a last name, and we can say that this is that. And now if I do last name, same story here. So I'm just going to copy this, and let's take a look. Print first name, whoops, and then hit Control Enter. This is the first name, this is the last name. Now strings are cool because they can also be joined. So you can join one string with another string. And what this looks like is if I do full name is equal to first name plus last name, you would join them or concatenate them using this kind of plus operator. So you would add these strings together. And now what I can do is I can say, let's put a quotation. I can say your full name is, I'm going to put a colon, space, and then close this. I'm going to add a plus sign, and then I'm going to do full name. So this should print this string first, and then our full name string. And that's what we have. But you'll see here that, it's not looking very nice. We're obviously missing a space. What we can do is where we're assigning this kind of variable, first name, full name, we can go in here. We can also just add inside of a quotation a space and hit plus, and then run that. And there we go. So this is what a string looks like. A string is a sequence of characters, usually for names, addresses, could be even emails or bodies of text, doesn't really matter. The next thing we have is something called an integer. Integers are pretty self-explanatory. This could be something like age, so let's just put age as 23. Integers are just numbers that are round, so they don't have any decimal points. Those are what we call floats, which we'll get to. But you can do all sorts of math on integers, so you could do age plus 1. This should give you 24. If you want to increment age, you would do age is, I think it's plus equals to 1. And what this is saying is increment age by 1. What this will do now is if I print age in the next cell, it'll actually increase the age to 24. If I increment it by 2, this should now give us 26 because we've gone from 24 to 26. But essentially integers can be used to do a lot of math and store these kind of non-decimal placed numbers. An interesting thing to note is now if we try and do something similar to what we had before, where we were printing, instead of printing your full name, we'll do your age is, colon, and then close the quotation, add a plus sign, and now if I do age, this is actually going to throw us an error. And if you look at the error, what it's saying is that we have a type error, meaning that one of our data types has a problem. And what it's saying is that you cannot concatenate an integer to a string. Remember earlier what we were doing is adding two strings together. Now what we're technically doing is trying to add a string and an integer. And what Python is saying is, I don't know how to handle that. How do I add a number to a string? So the way we handle that and what we have to do on its behalf is something called typecasting. We'll talk about this more if it comes up, but it's interesting to know, it's good to know. You can essentially convert these variables into different data types. So this age, currently, if I do type age, it's an integer, which is why we're getting the problem. But what you can do is just convert it to a string by wrapping around the variable this function, string. Whoops. So if I now run this, this should be fine. Of course, the problem with this now, though, is that if I wanted to add 1, it's not going to work because, again, we're dealing with a string. Okay, so that's something called typecasting. There's various kind of implications of that we can talk about later. The next thing that we have is something called floating points. Floating points are very similar to integers. Let's say something like height is a common example, 1.7.7. It's basically just a decimal number. You can convert this to an integer and it would round it down. You can also, I don't know if there's a round function built in, maybe not. I don't think, there is. This one will actually round you up. But essentially, we don't need to worry about floats too much just yet. Just know that they exist and it's different, and how they're different to integers. The last one is Boolean, and it's pretty easy. We can just, usually this is true or false in Python, but this can also be represented by zeros and ones, or actually other way around, 1 and zeros. We're not going to worry about that too much now. True and false is important, and basically what it is just a container that says whether something is true or false. So what we could do here, again, very similar to before, is say you could say, are you online? And then what I'm going to do is, again, add a space, add a plus. And if I did online here, I would get an error because it's saying that we're trying to now concatenate a Boolean to a string. What I should actually do is similar to before, wrap this inside of a string function. And now we have our output. The last thing I'm going to talk about kind of briefly, it's not very important, is multiple assignment. And essentially what this is instead of writing 3 lines to assign these 3 different kind of things, what I can do is just collapse all of this into one line. So what I've done here is just first name, last name, and age is equal to, so this is the first name, this is what I want the last name to be, and the age is going to be that. And you'll see that I get the exact same output, except it's much tidier and cleaner. It's not necessary. Honestly, it might be a bit more confusing, so I don't recommend it. It's something to be aware of. Another way this could work is if you have, instead of assigning 3 variables to the same value, you could just put it all in one line, and then that way you get this output. So hopefully that's an introduction to what data types are in Python. So you should walk away with this knowing what a string is, what an integer is, what a floating point is, what a Boolean is, and you have one strong example of why these data types matter. Your example would be printing them and concatenating them with other strings. Concatenating them with other strings. You got to make sure that these data types can talk to each other, and this will be something that will be very important when we work with our data frames. Awesome, thank you so much.